Alrighty. Okay, so this is Get in Perspective with Corwyn Prichard. Today I am gonna, well, introduce myself first. You gotta go with the slides in the right order. So this is me. I am a 2D and 3D artist and game developer. I've worked on these games on the left here, Bloodborne fan game and Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. And on the right is the game that I'm working on right now. Yeah, I'm Portland-based and loving life. So today we're going to talk about the basics of perspective and projection, and we'll cover what that even means. We're going to talk about different types of views and different types of projection in games. We're talking about the relationship between perspective and gameplay, and we're going to talk about why you should break all the rules all the time, but on purpose. Deliberately. I'm not great with microphones, so if I get too quiet, just give me a little, gesture of some kind. Cool. So, part one, we're just going to talk about perspective in graphics in general. So when you're talking about perspective, you're talking about projection. Projection is basically any methodology that you're using to flatten 3D space to a 2D plane. And there are different types of methodologies, different types of techniques that you're going to use to project stuff to a 2D plane. We all exist in 3D space, and if you're able to see, then you're able to, parse visual information that you're taking in. You're going to take in things called depth cues, and you're going to approximate in your brain the size and relative location of things in 3D space. But if you're working on a 2D canvas, which unless you're doing some crazy stuff, you're probably doing in game development, then you need to, well, you don't need to, but it's good to know about the techniques that you use to compress the world that you're trying to imply to your player down to a 2D canvas. And that method is going to be projection. Different types of projection omit and distort information, and different types of projection are going to preserve or distort different types of information more or less. So you got to be judicious about what you want to use. You got to know what information you're trying to preserve so that you can kind of imply things as strongly as possible. So a really interesting thing about projection is that you can basically watch, you can go on Wikipedia, I highly recommend, and you can look up the history of humans' ability to capture 3D space on a 2D canvas. And we have a bunch of different rationales that we've used over the years. And you can see the history of and sort of the evolution of people's understanding of how to map things to a 2D canvas. And you can also watch that history take place in the birth of video games. And it kind of mirrors the human development of different projection styles. So you've got 2D orthographic, you've got a single point perspective background. You don't need to memorize all these terms. These are just, for reference. We got isometric and oblique or cabinet view, which is not super common in games, but it's a very specific thing. And so I'm going to help you know some of the basics of what these different types of ways of mapping space are, so that you can make more judicious decisions in your game design. Broadly speaking, I'm omitting some details here to keep it under 20, but broadly speaking, there's going to be two schools of projection. You're going to have perspective projection and orthographic or parallel projection. So perspective is going to emulate how your eyes work, and it's mostly characterized by objects getting smaller as they're further away. If you have a pair of parallel lines and you're looking at them in perspective, eventually they will meet at what's called a vanishing point or the horizon. And that is really the biggest characteristic, is that it's emulating the sort of way that things get smaller or bigger depending on where the viewer is in space. Orthographic projection is more technical. It's more sort of math-driven, and it's going to keep objects in the same scale, essentially, regardless of how close or far away they are from the camera. Parallel lines will never converge in an orthographic projection, and different types of orthographic projection will preserve the relationship between certain measurements and certain angles really, really well. So right here we've got 3 different Sonic games. On the right, we've got isometric. These are two orthographic types of projection. On the left, we've got perspective. If we draw grids over these, then we can see everything in this 3D view converges on a vanishing point, whereas all these lines are going to stay parallel forever. All of these checkers are the same size regardless of how far away they are from the camera. All of these squares in this 2D platformer are perfectly square, and their relationship to the platformer character is basically like 1-to-1 proportional. And that's great for a platformer because those are games about interacting with space on a 2D axis. So that's like a really, really good way of conveying exactly what you need information-wise for that game. We'll talk more about that in part 2 of the talk, but yeah. So we're going to play a quick game just so I can make sure we're all on the same page here. Feel free to shout stuff out if you feel brave and confident. I'm going to show you some game pictures. You're just going to tell me if it's perspective or orthographic. Perspective, that's correct. These lines are all moving towards a vanishing point. Wonderful. Orthographic, baby! All right. Orthographic as well. You're good at this. You're killing it. Perspective. Oh my God. 10 out of 10 performance, you guys. All right, perfect. A term that you're going to hear often in game design and game development that gets misused sometimes is a specific type of projection called isometric projection. Isometric meaning same measurement or equal measurement. Iso, same, metric, measurement. It's a very specific type of orthographic projection. I bring it up because it gets thrown around a lot, but I don't think that it's a flexible term. But it means specifically a type of orthographic projection, so all the lines remain parallel, things don't get smaller as they're farther away. But it's a view where same measurement, the x, y, z measurements are all proportional to each other. So if you see a cube in an isometric view and it's true isometric, then it's going to be 1 by 1 by 1. And you could take a ruler to that and it would be proportional. All of the angles are messed up because that's not being preserved by that projection. But it's great for having that kind of relationship where all three of those things are proportional. It gets used for a lot of games just to say this game is top-down, which is not technically what isometric means. And that's not a big deal, but if I'm going to give a talk on perspective, I'm going to complain about that for a second. You can see in these games on the right that things are getting smaller as they're further away. They're using perspective cues. And on the left, this game is slightly rotated in its viewpoint, so it's not technically isometric. Not a big deal. I'm the only one that will get annoyed, I promise. And it's worth mentioning before I go on that you're not often going to get games that are just perspective or just orthographic, unless the game is just all 3D. But like, you're going to mix different types of projections. You're going to use different types of visual information to give the player the experience that you're looking to give them, essentially. Let me check my time here. Oh, 8 minutes. We're killing it. All right. So I mentioned depth cues. Depth cues are just pieces of information that you interpret, that your brain interprets to approximate where things are in space. You all presumably know that I'm not a tiny man. I'm just far away from you, right? So like, and you can put that together, right? And so you know that from where you're sitting, like the people in front of you are not getting progressively smaller. Like that's just where they are in space. So there's a billion gajillion depth cues. I highly recommend, this is a dorky thing to do, go on Wikipedia and look at the depth cues page. It's really interesting. But we're going to talk about a couple that help in games. You got relative size, so things getting smaller as they're further away. It's especially effective if you have a repeating object like these snake things here or these rings. If it's a repeating object so you know how big it is, then you can kind of tell, oh, I see. Like if you see a person in a specific spot, you know how far away approximately. It really helps if there's a familiar object. You've got motion parallax, which is the nature of things that are closer to you to tend to look like they're moving faster than things that are further away, which can be used to imply, a space on a lateral axis or vertical. You've got shadows, which are really, really good for grounding things in 3D space. A lot of platformers, including Mario 64 here, will just put the shadow straight down so that you know exactly where that thing is in 3D space. And I think if any game has a jump button, it should be illegal not to do that. That rules. Another thing that I really like that's very subtle is called atmospheric perspective. When things are far, far away, oh, I wish you could see out the window. We could just look right out there. If things are far away, there's a lot more atmosphere between you and the object. And it affects how the object looks because there's stuff in the way. So things get washed out, desaturated as they're farther away. And games like Yoshi's Island here do this to great effect to imply that there's something way in the background there. By desaturating it, taking away the outline. And this is the kind of thing that I mean, right? Yoshi's Island is a 2D game. It's an orthographic view. It's not like they're doing linear perspective or something, but they're using these tricks to imply that something is far away because they're blending different types of projection in order to give you the information they want to give you. Excuse me. Okay, part 2, baby. Where are we at? Excellent. Okay, so this is we're a little off-topic thing here for a second. So Ludo narrative. Who in here has heard this term before? All right, you're all, yeah, game developers, yeah. All right, so Ludo narrative just means the relationship between the gameplay and the narrative or the story that you're telling. And a lot of the time that gets used for like video essay, big talk, thematic stuff. But I would extend it to just mean anything that is fictional that you're conveying to your player, essentially, right? And perspective is extremely useful for conveying both gameplay and narrative information. And it can skew towards one or the other. So we're going to look at 2 platformers here, right? So we've got Super Mario Brothers. Can you all still see me? That's great. OK. I'm just going to point right at it. We got Super Mario Brothers here on the left and Pac-Land on the right. Both of these characters narratively are jumping in the air, and they're going to land somewhere on the ground. Now, Super Mario Brothers is an orthographic side view, which tells you exactly in an imperfectly spatially proportional relationship where everything is relative to each other. So we're pretty sure where Mario is going to land when he comes down from that. That's really intuitive. Pac-Man, I don't know where he's going to land. I don't know where the ground plane is. There's no shadow. I don't know if you can jump on that building up there. I will say that we've got a town here. We've got this beautiful linear perspective that really implies the space. We're in this town. I get that. I think that's really strong. I think gameplay-wise, they're suffering for it, right? They've decided to lean in one direction or the other, and they're not really getting bang for their buck gameplay-wise. And Nintendo, gameplay-first people that they are, decided to make it super, super clear what's happening gameplay-wise first. Back to Kirby, this is another example of just, this is a 2.5D game, so the gameplay is happening on a 2D axis, but it's presented in 3D, which is going to muddle the platforming a bit. We can see, these platforms are deep, but you don't know exactly where Kirby's going to land. It's a little less legible, but it gives this wonderful sense of space. And also, there are enemies in this room in the game that attack you from the background. So it is using the perspective also as a gameplay element. They're hiding gameplay information on another layer that you couldn't do in 2D as easily. So it's just different tools that you have to use deliberately to invoke different things. And you'll get certain strengths or weaknesses from either one. This is Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. My timer has stopped. Oh, no, I just clicked off of it. That's fine. This game's perspective on first blush is kind of whack. If you showed me a drawing that you did like this, I'd be like, why did you do it like that? But if we look at it as a game, it's kind of genius. So we've got these areas. I'm just going to go over here again. We've got these areas that could just be big black blocks as far as the game is concerned. You can't get up on these walls. You don't need to imply that depth, but they're using this kind of linear perspective to imply the scene. They're showing you the setting that this character is in. Also, there's parts of the game where you can get up here and then jump down, but you're never doing any gameplay stuff in this area. And so they use that to build a sense of narrative, build a sense of space. And then we've got Link, and Link is bent in a direction so that you can see him, right? Because if we actually draw a perspective grid on this game, We've got a bunch of lines that don't converge on a vanishing point because this is a Super Nintendo game and that would be ridiculous. But we've got Link tilted away from the camera because it would be really boring to be looking at the top of Link's head for the entire game. We get no character from that, right? So you tilt him just a little bit away, you just fudge the perspective so you can see who this guy is. But we've got these blocks and they're not sticking up at all. But that's because those blocks are a gameplay element that you can push around in any 4 directions. And if they were sticking up and obscuring your player character, it's going to be less clear what the boundaries of those boxes are and how you collide with them. So we're looking at like a really smart, really deliberate set of rule breaking in order to imply a really strong sense of space that is also super accessible from a gameplay standpoint. And if you think that you're just going to make your game in 3D and not have to do any of that stuff, you're wrong. They made a sequel to Link to the Past, and to make it look how they wanted, they had to really go in there and just mess everything up to get it looking good. And so, you know, it helps to know all of these rules so that you can break them exactly how you want them broken, essentially. This is one of the most infamous. You would refer to this as Ludo narrative dissonance, right? So we're getting 2 different pieces of information. We're being told that we're in this field that disappears onto the horizon. You know, there's depth here that's implied, but it's a 2D platformer game, so that doesn't work at all. This character is interacting with essentially a nonsense space where they are platforming and falling off of the background into the foreground. And it's deeply unintuitive. It is infamously bad. This is Legend of Zelda Wand of Gamelon. And it's a really good indicator of a disconnect between sort of the narrative and ludic utility of perspective. It just completely borks this game. And I'm showing a lot of retro stuff here because a lot of people just make games in 3D. They don't really do any ambitious perspective stuff because you can just have the camera move around with the right stick, and that's valid. But I would encourage you to think about this stuff because there is a lot of unexplored territory there, a lot of room for expression, a lot of room for really interesting decisions that no one's really trying to make right now. I'm going to show you a clip from one of my favorite recent examples of like weird perspective decisions in a game. We've got Nier Automata here, big fancy AAA release, 3D game. You're running around, but then we compress the gameplay axis into 2 dimensions, and all of a sudden we're doing a 2.5D game where narratively this character is just on a precarious edge, but gameplay-wise we have compressed what the player is doing to 2 axes so that they can focus on platforming and doing cool fights with enemies and stuff. And this is shifting dynamically, right? This just happens and then it stops happening. And it's a way of making a really conscious design decision that affects how your player is interacting with the world that you're building. You don't just have to give them free rein and then have them make their own camera angles. You can make interesting decisions that guides them into interesting framing, interesting narrative. We've got another one here. It zooms up, right? Looks down. It's a bullet hell now. We're emphasizing the XY axis because that's where all the dodging is happening, right? So they're doing this. They're doing, like this is Mario or Zelda, right? This is 2D, but we've just dynamically shifted into it in a way that you can only do in a modern game. And I think that's really interesting. I think I want to see more people play with perspective, play with projection. I think it's very easy to just look at a game that did it already and copy what they did. And that's valid. I don't think that's wrong, right? But if you do that, you are cheating yourself out of a lot of really interesting decisions, a lot of interesting exploration. And I think it's important not to just take everything for granted. I think it's important to make decisions because you can make your mark on your game by having a really deliberate approach to how you do these things, and that will in turn leave a mark on your player. And I think it'll make for a stronger thing. That just restarts the video, that's fine. Main takeaways of the talk, learn the rules for conveying space to your audience, or don't, but like try, you know. Think about what you're doing all the time. if it's not overwhelming, think about the decisions you're making, what you're showing to your player. Think about what you want to emphasize for your player. What is the most important thing for your player to take away from what you're showing them? And yeah, don't take anything for granted. Learn the rules, and then break them, but smartly. Thank you all for your time. You're lovely. And these are my Blue Sky accounts for my stuff in my game. I'm Corwyn Prichard. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're doing Q&A. Cool. Yeah. So put your hand up if you got any questions. And oh, all right. Hell yeah. I mean, heck yeah.
Hi. This might be a technical / later question.
Hit me.
Let's say in 3D, you want to try to make an oblique angle, that square on the front, off to the side.
Yeah.
Is this and game engines have hey, here's your perspective, here's your projection. I noticed that you had a graph showing that it's like a diagonal projection, but like what goes into that?
Yeah, like a cabinet perspective, like Earthbound. You can do it. You just got to break some stuff. The thing that's interesting about Riley's talk, right, is that if you want to make decisions, then you're going to have to learn what decisions have already been made for you and unmake them, right? So I made a shader to create. I was working on a game. Oh, I wish I had it right here. That'd be so cool. I'll show you later. It's on YouTube. I can bring it up for you. But I had a game where I wanted the foreground to be orthographic, but I wanted the background to have 3D elements. And you can just write a shader. So let's say you've got a cube, right, and you're making it in 3D space. You can write a shader that just takes the back of that cube, pushes it up and over, pushes the vertexes up at a certain rate. You can just totally mess with it. And it's jank because that's not what they think you're going to use the engine for, but it is possible. And there's almost always a way. And the more atomic components you know about an engine, the more like theory you know, the easier it is to bust that stuff. But it's absolutely possible, yeah. Yo.
Hi. It's totally fine if you don't feel comfortable sharing this, but I'd love to know if there's any way that you are breaking these sort of perspective, like doing things that they are talking
Yeah,
about.
doing interesting things. No, I'm lame as hell. So I'm working on a game right now, right? I'm working on a Metal Gear Solid clone, and I've been trying to write the camera for a while because the thing about having a game where you just move the right stick and the camera moves is that pretty much just takes care of the camera. And maybe you should do that, but maybe you're dumb and you want to do some cool stuff. So like I was recreating Metal Gear Solid's camera, and I realized that it didn't work for my game. First of all, it was too iconic. It was just Metal Gear Solid camera, and it's like, well, that's Metal Gear Solid. And it's like, I could do that, but I'm currently in the space where I'm trying to figure out how do I have a top-down camera for my stealth game that is not just Metal Gear Solid, that has personality. And I haven't totally cracked that yet. It's pretty hard. But I do think it's gonna, I don't know that I'm gonna be, I'm gonna blow everybody's mind, but I already know from what I'm doing, I have some ideas for how to give it a certain amount of personality so that it's not just a carbon copy that has, by proxy, the identity of the thing I'm copying, essentially. So yeah, I try. I do a lot of 3D stuff, and it is harder to do interesting stuff with projection in 3D. But like that demo that I mentioned, that you can come to me and I'll show it to you. Like that was me trying to pay homage to Symphony of the Night, which did some interesting stuff, mixing orthographic and perspective to this really cool, beautiful sense of scene, but in an orthographic game. So yeah, I try to experiment. It's hard to do interesting things. It's hard to be interesting, but I try. Yeah. Do we have? Oh, okay. I got two more back there. I'm gonna drink some water.
Hello. You showed us a couple of examples of bad perspective, like the Pac-Man and the Zelda game. I was wondering if you think, in your opinion, with enough application, could someone fix those without completely redesigning?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Okay, so Merlin is saying without saying, we worked together on a spiritual successor to to the Zelda CDI games that are infamously bad. And I did backgrounds for them. So I was in the position that those people were in, right? And it's in this presentation. I wish I had time to like show it off in the presentation, but you can see in the background of my About Me slide, I did basically CDI Zelda background, right? So this is me back here. And you can see I'm trying really, really hard to have a sense of scene and use the unique advantages of having a hand-drawn background to create a sense of scene and depth and setting. But at the same time, I'm trying to be super rigid about what is foreground and what is background. It is possible to pull that off. And if the Zelda CDI people had the right resources and not been in like the worst position ever, then they could have made a good game. They just didn't. And that's like, in a way, you can read up on what happened there. Like, it's not just because they wanted to and couldn't. It's like they were like required to have FMV footage. They were required to have hand-drawn backgrounds, which was not a thing you did in games back then. This way of doing backgrounds, you can't edit stuff. You can't make tile sets. So it's like, this is a pretty rough workflow for a certain reason. But you can do it well, and I like to think that we did. But yeah. Thank you, Merlin. Was there someone else back there? Oh, yo.
Yeah, it's not really much of a question, I suppose. I want to just hear you. I want to hear you like muse a little bit.
Sure.
You talked a lot about perspective and obfuscation, so characters getting like the past example of like the block being viewed from the top, and we don't want to see like Link getting covered up. And there's a lot of games that have like alternate methods of showing a character still, even when they are like covered up. I'm curious like what your thoughts are on like avoiding situations where they're covered up, or if you need to cover them up, like what are interesting ways of like handling a character being obfuscated? Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I mean, because I'm working on a Metal Gear Solid clone, and that game works its camera over time to make sure that you always see Snake, basically. This is a boring answer, but it is always going to depend on what you're going for, right? I have seen a lot of stuff, because we're in the era of move the camera with the right stick. That's just how games get made. But I've seen interesting stuff, right? I've seen like there are certain things where people will do an alpha cutout. So if foliage gets in between you and the camera, it kind of dithers away, or they'll make kind of a stylistic cutout. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think like the Nintendo, the Link to the Past thing of just kind of pushing all of the, I'm sorry to just like, that's kind of an inelegant way of doing that, huh? The Link to the Past way of doing things, of just kind of tilting everything away from your character, is a little inelegant, but I don't know. It really does depend on what you're going for, and that's such a boring answer. It's a case-by-case basis. I think that there's always room for breaking the rules. You could have stuff covering up your character. The way that Nintendo designs games is so play first that it's like, you can tell that's really, really what they're pushing for there. So, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting problem with not really one answer. And depending on what you're doing, what you're going for, you're gonna have a million different options. But I think I appreciate stuff like this, or kind of these creative little solutions. It's hard to say. Like Metal Gear Solid has all these crazy camera angles where you'll go behind a pipe, and then it's like, all right, we're cutting to this camera angle, Snake's down here, and it's like, whoa, it's like a movie. And I really appreciate this stuff because it's so ambitious, and it's something that people do just take as fixed now. They're just like, we solved game cameras, it's fine now. And it's like, well, that's boring. Like you can still do interesting things. I think that's a big part of, I hope I'm not rambling too much. Are we good on time? This will be the last thing. A thing that I like about retro games that people don't talk about that often is that you get to go back to a bunch of ideas that are now deemed primitive. A bunch of things, a bunch of like half imagined thought processes and different like ways of looking at things that didn't pan out to be the mainstream that are still there and interesting. And you can go back to them. It's not just nostalgia to go back and say, wow, Metal Gear Solid 1's camera is crazy in comparison to anything that's getting released today. Like, what were they doing? Why did they do it? How can I lean into that? And I think that's an exciting thing. That's why so many of these are retro, is because like they had more interesting solutions before they all just started copying Zelda. So, you know, but yeah, that's my time. You feel free to come talk to me. Thank you all. I hope you have a lovely evening.